So, good afternoon to everybody, and a very warm welcome indeed to Feud-Free Family Festivities. Jennifer Liston-Smith here, Director of Coaching and Consultancy with My Family Care. I'm delighted to have with us today a really expert and engaging panel to unpack this topic. We have to make an apology for mentioning Christmas, as we are obliged to do so many times during this webinar today, but I guess you've all signed up with a view to really unpacking the topic, which we plan to do together. And key in helping us do that, we're absolutely delighted to have Susie Heyman with us today, very well known as an agony aunt in Woman magazine and various other publications that she's written for along the way, such as Woman's Own and The Guardian and The Times and so on, counsellor and trustee of Family Lives, the charity. So Susie, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, and hello everybody.
And Susie's written several books that may be of interest, and on the slide at the end with resources listed, you can see various elements of what we might unpick today being captured there in those book titles. So there'll be useful resources potentially going forward. Yeah. We are also delighted to have with us Amanda Sasada from the My Family Care Executive Coach team, experienced webinar presenter and also somebody who does a lot of group coaching, one-to-one coaching and seminars around areas such as work-life balance, as well as bringing your own huge amount of personal expertise in this area, Amanda.
Hi, Jennifer. Yes, I'm really pleased to be here. Yeah, I guess the huge experience is down to having 4 children. What can I say? All teenagers now.
Lovely. Thank you, Amanda. And also delighted to have Harriet Dean, one of our childcare consultants and maternity mentors here at My Family Care. Again, Harriet brings a huge wealth of information of working with parents and families in our client organisations. Many of you may know Harriet, and indeed you have your own personal family experience to share as well, don't you, Harriet?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm single mum to 2 children, huge advocate of Christmas, so looking forward to this webinar.
Great. Many thanks, Harriet. So most of you on the line will already know My Family Care. We provide your work and family space. In a nutshell, we're about enabling employers and employees to make work and family work. So we have the guests with us today who are happy to share information and ideas, but we'll also be inviting you to engage as we go along as well. So one of the things that's worth knowing is that we're recording the session, so you can listen again afterwards in case there are things that you may want to hear again. We really valued all the information that you input on registration. There's a huge amount of sharing there, and we're going to touch on some of the themes that you raised in very concrete ways. Do type in questions as we go along if there are further things that you'd like to see covered, and please do take part in the polls that we'll be launching at various points during this session to share information. So here are some of the points that we promised to address on registration, some of the highs and lows of Christmas. What do we want? How do we manage expectations, those of our own and of others? And how do we survive and thrive and perhaps make it through to a new year with some perhaps added resilience through taking a slightly different approach to Christmas, potentially. One of the things we're aware of as we go forward in this webinar is that we, the panel, will need to steer a course between the kind of more frivolous, light-hearted notes to what we could call Christmas stress, and some of the more serious issues that can crop up and emotions that can be triggered at this time of year. So bear with us if you feel we're erring a bit too much on one side or the other, depending on your own position. But we'll really attempt to embrace what, it can be a season of some extremes for some people. So we'll attempt to be kind of all-inclusive. But as I said, do type in questions if you feel you'd like to draw us particularly in one direction or another. So we're going to launch our first poll to make sure that we get everybody sharing and engaged in the webinar. So what are the high points? We promised to look at the highs and lows of Christmas, and believe me, we'll be looking at some of the challenges shortly. But what are the good things about this season? What does it mean to you? And you can pick more than one of these at the moment. So if you wanted to say it's a break from work and you enjoy giving and sharing, you can pick both of those. For some, it may be this time of year is a religious festival. Naturally, it's a Christian festival that we're aware of at the heart of Christmas, but for some, it's just been Diwali, it's Hanukkah coming, so maybe you also celebrate the solstice. So it could be that this time of year is a time that you celebrate as a genuine festival, or perhaps it's a time of year when there are just kind of nice lights and good times. So let us know what it is that makes Christmas a good thing. But panel, I mean, do we enjoy Christmas? Do you enjoy Christmas?
Love it. I absolutely love it. And I'll tell you the funniest thing is, this is Susie speaking, I'm actually Jewish, at least my family is, but I'm not religious at all. I love Christmas. My grandmother always used to celebrate it, even though she was actually quite a Zionist, because as she said, better parties and better presents. And I just love the winter. I love the sort of the winter festivities idea. It's an ancient festival about light and bringing that spring, bringing, hope for the future. And I love presents, not for the things, but for the giving, the packing them up and the presenting them to people, giving people presents. I love that television ad last year with a little boy desperately waiting for Christmas, not for his presents, but to give his parents their presents. And that, to me, is what Christmas is all about. In fact, it's sharing the goodwill and sharing the love.
Absolutely. So we'll let the poll run for just a moment longer. A couple of questions have come in already, which is great. One comment that Christmas is too commercialized, all about money. I think many of us would agree that, seeing tinsel in the shops in October or September even can be a little bit galling. Also an interesting question, perhaps related to Susie's comments there about combining cultures and traditions. How do you explain Santa if the culture is from the figure is from a culture different from your own? So certainly Christmas could be a time of kind of colliding of cultures, can't it?
I think it can, but I mean, on the other hand, as I said, it's all from very ancient ideas of getting you through those dank, dark months until spring is coming, and that's what the candles are all about. They mimic, the buds on fir trees, and I think that people instinctively know this. It's actually about celebrating rebirth in all sorts of ways and in all sorts of cultures. And so I think that's why we want to do it, and that's why we have these lovely fantasies. I mean, Santa Claus. It's a lovely idea of spreading cheer, of actually helping other people, giving gifts to other people, and being kind to other people.
Absolutely. And, a lot of people there looking at the poll results enjoying giving and sharing, but for the vast majority, ticking the family time in a good way option came up high. And, it's a very interesting one because it's a real kind of mixed blessing, isn't it? A lot of what we'll be unpacking as we go forward are the challenges represented by family being kind of hothoused together at this time. But, somehow deep down we crave that. So that's interesting. And many thanks indeed for taking part in that poll. So we'll move on to some of the information that you shared when you signed up for the webinar. How are you going to spend this time? So 82% of you said that it would be a fairly traditional time. We've got well over 100 registered for the webinar, so that's what we're looking at in terms of a fairly big sample. So that's interesting that we talked about whether a modern Christmas is different in what we said we'd address. Well, some of you have some different takes on it, but the vast majority, whatever fairly traditional may mean, that's what you're kind of going for. Some away on holiday, some with our own novel version, and some perhaps doing nothing out of the ordinary, which may equate to fairly traditional. But panel, do we think Christmas is changing?
I think with families these days, there's a lot of different issues around who's going to be with you if you call it a family day. For myself, I'm a single parent, and that does sometimes mean that my children aren't with me over the whole of the Christmas period. So for me, it's about managing that in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Harriet. And I think that must be a key point for many people. So families perhaps are maybe more blended and less predictable in shape than perhaps they were when we felt obliged to kind of carry on in the same track whether or not things were working. So there can be a level of complexity and a level of jangling of our emotions relating to that.
The emotions bit is important because it's it's not just the logistics of, as you say, of being in different places, of having children perhaps spread around, and each parent sees them for part of the time and therefore doesn't see them for part of the time. But it's the emotions that go with that. And it's mixing up things like having, maybe two sets of children from two different families coming
Completely.
together.
I think we'll come back to that, won't we, Susie, as we go forward. So the main hopes that you have for this festive season, 65% hoping to feel festive and celebratory, just you know, some of you happy to get on in a dignified way, which is a kind of nice British concept, a multicultural British concept, I'm sure. Just get through it. And indeed, you know, there were some heartfelt comments on the registration form of really not liking Christmas and just kind of hoping that it'll go away quite quickly. And, you know, we recognize for some people it is a tough time. We don't want to make light of that. But for some, it's a time when, you know, there'll be highs and lows, and let's see if we can maximize the highs, including some time for me, which was the aspiration of some of you. Key concerns include living up to our own high standards, so kind of unsurprisingly large group of us feel pressure in that regard. So that's an interesting one which we'll return to.
Oh, that's true.
I'm really struck by that one as well, just in terms of what you were saying earlier about Christmas starting so early in terms of the pressures, and it kind of feels like a machine sometimes to me, of almost like this rolling pressure and building up to be, you know, some great event. And as you say, I'm sure a lot of that comes from a personal angle, wanting to make it great.
Yeah, I think that's so right, Amanda. And our marketing director was saying to me this morning that her mum always used to say, "It's only one day."
Exactly.
But boy, do we end of the day with the spotlight on it.
My mum says that to me, and then she says, "And by the way, darling, can you get all of your children presents from me and post them and wrap them?"
Oh, I love that.
It's officially only the one day, but in fact, you know, there is that whole holiday period. You know, you want to make Christmas Eve special, Christmas Day special, Boxing Day, and then the days in between until New Year. The whole thing's got to be, you know, quite marked in some way, I feel.
And it's not 12 days when you think about it. I mean, if you actually break up, and of course there'll be some families now that stop on the Friday, have the weekend, Christmas Eve on a Monday, then the Christmas break, you know, you're going right the way through to New Year's Day. That long period, I mean, I get so many letters to women from people who are feeling that long period.
I'm just feeling stressed now you're saying that out loud.
So let's have a look at some of the things that people specifically highlighted, because there's quite a large group there looking at how to entertain children being a concern, as well as managing other people's expectations. But let's unpick some of the actual wording that people kindly typed in, and then we'll go on to some kind of advice and reflection on how we could do things differently. So just very briefly, looking at what participants have typed in. So it's the over-sugared children, it's the awkwardness about, you know, whether children are going to perform in front of grandparents, keeping them perhaps to the family values that we might hold dear. You know, is it okay to be texting over the roast turkey, or is that kind of just a bit too much? And also, you know, as we've already touched upon, the really understandable pressures, especially during a time of recession, to make Christmas special when a lot of that can cost quite a lot of money. So rather than unpacking those in great detail now, we'll definitely return to those. But we're going to go on and have a look at some of the other themes that you raised. So who do you spend Christmas with? Trying to see everybody, perhaps showing off children to all sorts of people that want to see that child, juggling between different families, and juggling the guilt that goes with that, saying no, or, you know, extensive traveling. And Harriet, I know, you know, as you were saying, some of that comes, and Susie was underlining, with a kind of emotional pull as well, doesn't it, when families are separated in different directions?
Yes, I mean, I think it's a question of maybe when you know your child's going to be away, setting something that's actually you time, so something positive to focus on, rather than, you know, the danger of hitting the cherry brandy or whatever on Boxing Day. You know, set yourself a task, something to complete, something you can feel at the end of the day you've achieved, whether that's, you know, just putting your feet up and watching a film, or doing a bit of gardening, or going out with friends.
Yeah. Thank you, Harriet. We've got a few questions coming in, which is brilliant. Several on you know, having grown up with a family that was remarrying or being divorced, and the challenges of that, which we really recognise. Somebody raising that all the panel are female on the webinar, and are all the participants female? Well, I don't know that we have a sense of how many participants are female. We normally, on the My Family Care Work and Family Space webinars, we normally get quite a blend of people, and my colleague's just showing me the list, and there's a lot of male names on that list, I can assure you. We often have at least one male panelist, but it just kind of worked out this way that it was all women who took up our invitation to join, but point taken. And I think Christmas can be very stressful for dads too, or guys generally. Amanda, were you trying to say?
Well, I was just thinking that, maybe it's a good thing because maybe the guys are out there because we've delegated brilliantly instead of taking control over controlling, which is my tendency. And they're all out there buying trees or something that they're probably not.
It's interesting you mentioned buying trees, because there was a wonderful article. It was over 10 years ago now, but I unearthed it recently. Somebody called Guy Browning, you may know, who wrote a piece in the Guardian, How to Survive Your Family, all about Christmas. And it was a wonderfully witty piece. And he was saying that the main job of a dad is to go and get the tree. And then he said 3 things that dads have to remember once they've sorted the tree is that at any point during Christmas, if they're not preparing vegetables, they should be washing up. If they're not doing either of those, they should be bringing in crates of drink from the shed, mince pies from the freezer, and elderly relatives from Wolverhampton. So I think, there can be, women often have a moan about the pressures.
It's an important issue because this is the letters I get on Woman's Own about, from women who are really stressed and unhappy and bemoaning the fact that they seem to end up doing all the work. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I often say to them, here's a solution, is that, yes, it does tend to happen because we traditionally almost have been the ones who have done the emotional family stuff. Mm-hmm. So many men actually would love to take part, but they feel incompetent. Give them chores. And I think it's really important, actually. You mentioned delegation. Well, don't let them do the delegating. You do the delegating as the woman in the centre of the family. And start handing out, okay, you're in charge of this, you're in charge of that. And when people arrive for dinner, make it very clear that, afterwards with the washing up, that's your job, and that's your job. And I think sometimes we cut our own throats by playing the martyr and doing all the work and then, complaining about it afterwards. We need to actually spread that stuff around, and then we don't have anything to complain about.
Absolutely, and the slide I've just put up, relatives and relationships, a lot of people talking about marital tensions, arguments, and a lot of that comes about, I guess, through what we might call kind of passive-aggressive communication in the home, where we don't openly own up to needs and feelings, but there's a lot of huffing and puffing and slamming of doors about things that should have been totally obvious.
And they're not. People can't read your mind.
Yeah.
You need to plan beforehand of what needs to be done. How can you spread that around? How can you be clear? And thinking about the trigger points. What are the things last year and the year before that set you up and upset you? What can you do this time to actually, rather than hoping it's not going to happen again, what can you actually do? To head it off at the past. And it is so often possible to head off your resentments at the past if you recognise they're going to happen again.
Absolutely. So we're also, concerned about ourselves, sort of worrying that either we'll have to do all the hard work, worrying about maintaining energy levels, dealing with the kind of overload that follows the celebrations, and also the kind of keeping up appearances. And this is definitely something that we'll return to as we go through. But, a lot of quite specific points there, and other points are being shared through questions. There was somebody raising the question of Santa and whether we kind of fess up to who Santa is. And I think we should probably return to that definitely at a certain point as we go forward. But people talking here on questions about Christmas bringing raw emotions, which we're absolutely just about to acknowledge as well. Some of you shared in the registration process that, if there's been a bereavement or somebody lost through death, and that can also be perhaps somebody lost through a relationship breakdown, then Christmas can seem a particularly raw time, and we're going to come on to discuss that a little bit more in a few minutes. But, we're acknowledging that there's a whole raft of emotions and experiences here at play. Some of the other ways that some of you are going to spend Christmas this year: holiday abroad, being invited to a friend's restaurant, which apparently involved quite a staggering driving distance, but nonetheless perhaps a bit less cooking, or perhaps spending it on your own, or indeed working. Somebody typed in, so I don't know whether that's a positive way out from Christmas or not. It answers on a postcard perhaps from your holiday next year. But one of the things we wanted to invite you to do is to think about, sometimes it's easier looking at somebody else's situation to have it all sorted. Obviously they should do this, they could do this, and sometimes harder to see right under our own noses. So here's a kind of little vignette of somebody who's struggling a little bit with her Christmas situation. And if any of you can't see the slides at home, you may be just dialed in without the slides. I'll just read it out. So don't get me started on Christmas, but how is it that it's all down to me? It shouldn't be a surprise, though, because it's pretty much down to me every other day of the year. It seems to be a kind of punishment for not having worked hard enough the rest of the year. Then she says her favourite day is going to be the 12th day when it all gets packed up. Don't get me wrong, I love traditions, but honestly, I'm fed up with putting the tree up on my own. So she says she feels like a fool because the kids are growing and they don't any longer really want the tree, but they'd notice if it was missing. And my other half, she says, well, last year I pulled out all the stops, even put tinsel on his mother's Zimmer frame for him. And I wrapped about 1 million sprouts in bits of bacon for his huge family to consume, huge in every way. And he didn't get round to thinking of buying me anything more original than the usual set of underwear. Very nice, I'm sure, but a comfy pair of slippers and a warm bath would do for me. So bit of a moan there, bit of a sort of don't get me started. And we've got some ideas as a panel on what we could pull out from there, but we'd like to hear first from you. What would you do next? And we're going to give you one option. What would you tackle first? What's the kind of priority to start with here? If you had a range of options that we're launching now, which would you actually tackle? And feel free to type in if there's something altogether that you would do, you know, like clear off to the Caribbean or whatever, money permitting. Please feel free to type that in. There's somebody just typed in a question that I'm trying to get the hang of here. It's not about getting presents. So the person here is saying that they're not religious and don't attend church, so not sure where to start. I guess, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? If you have a religious celebration at the heart of Christmas, then you have a structure. And if you don't have that, then in some ways you're free to make it up. And I don't know whether there are pressures from sometimes other family members then to sustain a tradition that you might not particularly buy into. I don't know, Amanda, if you've got any sense of those different pressures.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think individual families often create over time their own culture in their own way. And I mean, I always think of the word culture as just how we do things around here, and it may be based on religion. It may just be just how we like to do it as a family. And I think there are some of the most special traditions and ways of doing things when you talk to friends and how they do it, you know, have often evolved almost by accident, but become quite entrenched in the way families do it. And that can be, I think, quite a nice thing. You know, when people talk about doing things in a traditional way, I think it means different things for everybody.
Absolutely. Somebody's just typed in that they have to say Christmas improved once they became a Christian. So if you're not religious, why not try volunteering to feel more connected? That's a lovely idea, you know, helping in a night shelter or something like that. So it kind of connects with the essential sense of giving, which whether it's a humanitarian thing or a Christian thing or another religious thing for any of us, we could certainly feel, you know, some sort of Christmas spirit through doing that, I'm sure. So we're going to close the poll now and share the results, which we can't wait to see. Interesting. Okay, so there's quite a strong vote in favour of letting every family member choose a tradition to carry on themselves. So if we really think the teenagers want the Christmas tree, then perhaps the teenagers choose to host the tree and take that forward. Good vote in favour of taking some time out, explaining that and being precise, you know, rather than moaning sort of, oh, nobody cares about me, being kind of concrete and specific about, now I'm going to go and have a lie down or, you know, walk around the block. So what do we think, panel, about that? Harriet, what was your reaction?
Well, my first reaction to this poor lady was, why on earth doesn't she verbalise how she's feeling? I mean, it's so easy to internalise these things. And it's almost as if she was expecting everybody to understand how she was feeling and automatically jump to it. So, yeah, my message would be, please, please tell somebody how you're feeling.
Yeah, I think it's terrible. Sometimes, as I said, you almost get a kick out of being the martyr rather than realising it would actually feel a lot better if you would sit down and say, right, this is what I feel and this is why and what I would like. I have a mantra. I call it the mantra because I think you should learn it, and then it can flow off your lips very, very easily. And that is that you say, when such and such happens, when everybody's enjoying themselves and I'm doing all the work, I feel rejected, I feel, you know, whatever I feel, angry, upset, resentful, because, and you explain, you know, what's going on here. What I would like is, and then what I would like is, You know, how about you doing some chores? How about us talking about it? The number of times people, when they verbalize it, as you say, the other person says, I never realized. I'm so sorry. I thought you enjoyed doing this. I thought you wanted to do it. I thought you didn't want me in the kitchen because you thought I would be a nuisance. You'd be surprised how people would like to help if only given the option to do so.
Absolutely. And the present buying issue, somebody's just typed in that after 15 years my partner gives me money instead of a present, that, you know, you can get around that.
I wanted to leap on that one, I have to say, Jennifer, because I spent years doing the not verbalizing my slight disappointment about presents and hoping to be, you know, very brilliantly surprised by some amazing thing. And I just thought, you know what, why don't I just kind of go and say exactly what I want? And I've been delighted ever since with my presents.
I really like that. Oh, look at that. Oh, isn't that wonderful?
Well, I'm much more specific. I say, I'd like to, I'm in a shop, I've seen something I'd love you to buy for me, and I buy it.
It can be done.
I'm very happy.
Gift lists, so somebody typing in now, so sharing gift lists, and everybody picks a couple of things, a bit like organising a wedding. It's cracking idea if your family's up for that kind of
We do that in our family. We do it very specifically, and actually it's lovely because we agree budgets. We send out lists to everybody, and people are happy. It can feel sometimes a little bit, you know, I don't know. I think when we first did it, it felt a bit uncomfortable. So, you know, because no one wants to be asking for something, so it doesn't feel terribly in the right spirit. But you know, just getting really practical when you've got a big family, it works brilliantly.
Well, here's an idea of your internet. If everybody sort of, you know, can work the internet, and that is that Amazon have, you know, a wish list section, and you can enter anything you like into it. So I've got a big long list there of books I want, DVDs I want, presents, all sorts of odd things that I have seen. That are, you know, available on the internet and are on that list, and people can go in and say to my family, go and have a look.
I'm just waiting for people to start typing in about boycotting Amazon this year for tax reasons, but you know, it's a personal view on whether you do or you don't. So
somewhere, but have a list somewhere that people can access.
Absolutely. And, you know, one more thing I just wanted to pick up on in this little vignette here, the kind of present giving here, you know, I think what's happening, because there's such a dearth of communication going on, a huge build-up of resentment, what Amanda often refers to as the burning martyr situation. You know, here's the husband with the best will in the world buying this underwear, you know, hoping to kind of bring about a certain romantic feeling, and the woman's saying, you know, that's the last thing. And there is a way in which, isn't there, if we are not communicating and not clear about our needs, we can end up with quite big rifts developing over stuff that we really didn't want to kind of fall out over. But it's just, you know, it can go quite deep, can't it? Really, what goes on?
Deeply. I mean, yes, I think we've all dealt with clients who have had years and years of resentment and unhappiness and misery, which could have actually been undercut so quickly and easily if only people had talked.
Absolutely, absolutely. So great. Many thanks indeed for taking part in that poll. So what do we do? How do you manage it going forward? Well, it's all relative, at least as far as your comments on registration are concerned. A lot of it is to do with the relatives. So we're going to touch on some of the things that we might do differently in these different areas of different relatives, whether it's grandparents or drunken uncles or in-laws with different views on work-life balance, or in-laws that don't help out and just sit there. You know, but some of you shared that, you know, maybe there are kind of difficult situations about relationships that have fallen apart, but, you know, you need to get back together for the sake of the wider family. And you know, maintain a united front. Some of you are you know, experiencing perhaps overbearing parents with their own views, and some of you are wrestling with being single and then, you know, perhaps either wanting or not wanting to spend Christmas on your own, but also being pulled in different directions. If you're single, everyone assumes you're free to go and visit them. But before we unpack some of those a little bit further, who will you have around the table or around the TV, or however you're going to gather on the 25th of December this year? We only had 5 options in the polling system, so apologies, it's a little bit generic. So perhaps you're not catering for others, or you have just the one generation of yourself and possibly a partner or friend. 2 generations, you and small children, 2 generations, you and older children, or you have older relatives, and that might mean you've therefore got 3 generations, or just you, grown-up or grown-ups, and older relatives. So let's hear who you've got around the table. But just coming back to some of those themes, Susie, which we're going to unpack in a minute. Certainly the issue of grandparents seems to crop up quite a lot, either grandparents giving too many presents, or grandparents wanting to be the ones in the spotlight and nobody else getting a look in.
Yeah. I think grandparents are hugely important to families, and they're wonderful. They are so useful to children to have that sort of, next generation on. Often grandchildren and grandparents actually can meet where parents and children can't, so they're wonderful to have. But yes, sometimes there's such a gap between what grandparents expect of children, the sort of rules they think should be kept.
Absolutely.
And they often want to, as you say, it's almost, particularly grandparents who live a long distance away, it's not that they're trying to buy love, but they're trying to make up for the fact that they're not there. And they can be buying presents, showering children with presents that the parents are not happy about. And indeed, if there is a step issue going on, a step family going on, you can have the dreadful situation of one child given lots of presents and another child not, because the grandparent doesn't consider that child to be one of theirs. So I think there's an awful lot of issues there that really do need communication between concerns, but often that's the problem, they don't.
Yes. Susie, I've just had somebody type in a question to say that it's quite difficult to hear you. That's not the case at my end, but if you can possibly hold the phone a bit closer, that would be great. Thank you. So a couple of people have typed in that they've got, 4 brothers and 3 sisters and so on, all seated around the table, and perhaps a few pets thrown in for good measure. But somebody's also typed in that they're being asked to buy presents for a brother's girlfriend that they've never met, and how do we do that? So there can be a few challenges about that, and I guess it comes back to possibly you could ask the opinion of the brother or so on. But I can see there's a fair few people have got the classic kind of several generations or older relatives present, so that's really helpful information. Thank you. And some of you are managing to avoid the catering altogether and visiting others, so that's rather wonderful.
You don't have the leftovers.
Yeah, it's true. There's a downside.
That could be a real problem if you go out for a restaurant, for instance. Wonderful on the day, but no leftovers the next day. And for an awful lot of people, I think Christmas is the best thing about it is being able to have fried Christmas pudding with your bacon on Boxing Day morning. Bubbling sweet.
Great. Well, indeed, what can we do about managing some of these pressures? We've already shared quite a lot of insight and ideas as we've gone along so far. But Amanda, I know you're particularly keen on the idea of keeping a sense of perspective and also being aware of how we perceive the challenges, and a challenge for one could be a delight for another.
Yes, I was really struck by this actually last Christmas when I was in the throes of preparing a big party actually for lots of friends that live locally, and I was also went on the following week to be making lots of pies and things with lots of relatives coming, and my friend said to me, "You make Christmas about as stressful as you could ever make it." And she said that all of that catering and making your homemade Parmesan crisps, and she was really mocking me and saying that sounds absolutely ghastly and she'd rather pull her fingernails out. And I was really thinking about this and thinking, actually that's the bit I love. And so that didn't feel at all stressful. It felt absolutely gorgeous to be able to do that. The bit that I found hugely stressful was the bit before that. It was kind of getting to that place and all the shopping and the coordinating of the presents. Already said, end up buying for both sets of parents on behalf of them, for my children and so on. And that build-up, which often combines with work pressures building up towards Christmas and children finishing school and so on and so forth, that's a bit for me. So I guess it's about how we're viewing a situation, and for each of us that will be slightly different. And it also occurs to me that it's helpful sometimes if we're finding something stressful, could we find a slightly different way of viewing it that might feel better, so perhaps slightly shifting.
And actually on that point, somebody's just typed in that their mother, whose birthday also happens to be on Christmas Day, is choosing to spend that alone due to certain sort of wider family tensions. And actually, in a way, perhaps the fact that the mother has chosen to spend that on her own, we might awfulize that in our minds and assume that's a really bad thing. But you know what? She might have a very peaceful day.
My mum said she would love to spend Christmas on her own, and I genuinely believe she would. My father wouldn't, so there's always this problem. But I think that you're absolutely right. It's about how we, how we all view it.
And absolutely. Coming back to the point about money, because several of the tips that I've got on the screen at the moment about sort of saying no and being fair and so on, we've kind of covered. But the money one, I mean, sometimes I know, Susie, from things that you've written, you're quite keen to emphasize that if we're honest, with teenagers who may want 3 Xboxes and a pair of Nike trainers, that they would still respect us if we're honest with them and help them to understand the cost of things.
I can't think of a better gift you could give your children than the ability to manage money in the future. Not to think that, with a wave of a wand it will appear, there'll always be someone to give you something, Father Christmas will always be there, parents will always be there. I think it's a really important thing to help children at quite an early age to recognize budgets and priorities and choices, and to know that, if they've asked for things and you're saying no, it's not because you're mean and nasty and hate them, or because they've been bad, but because there's a reality about finances here. I think it's really important to talk to children. And you can play a game with young children. You could do a shopping game where, before Christmas, what you do, before they write their list, is you have a little game about we're going to the shops to buy. We have to buy food, we have to buy an outfit, we have to do all these things. So what you teach them is there's a limit to how much you've got, and maybe, putting things together, several children, pooling their resources, that sort of stuff would work. And then, when the Christmas list comes, you can actually say, remember the game, it's the same sort of thing. We haven't got enough to cover everything. How are we going to do this? And then when they get to teenagers, they understand this. You can ask them to go and have holiday jobs if there's something expensive they want. They'll understand, but what it needs is for you, in a sense, to set aside your pride of being the parent who can do everything and supply everything, and talk to them about realities.
Yes, and I think it's worth reminding ourselves that the presents will soon be forgotten. I mean, probably by next Christmas, they won't even remember what you gave them. And it's more about quality time and what they'll take forward and bring to their own family traditions when they're adults.
Indeed. I think time together.
Thank you, Harriet. Yes, and there's a lovely point just been typed in. Somebody's typed, one mum I heard of was using second-hand gifts, obviously, that saves some money, and told the children that the elves had been a little bit naughty and had played with them already.
So
it's
lovely.
Pre-owned, I love that phrase, pre-owned. Pre-owned and pre-loved.
Pre-loved, yeah. Must draw attention to a fantastic tip shared by Kristen in the office, our social media manager, allocating Christmas jobs in crackers. Apparently this goes on in her family. People get their jobs in a Christmas cracker. So, I mean, you can do a little bit of forward planning that you don't get the 3-year-old to cook the turkey or something. But
add out the teenagers' jobs, the small children's jobs. Brilliant idea.
So that's rather brilliant. And yeah, finding the moments in between. Many of us will be rushing from one thing to another, and it will feel quite hectic and perhaps overwhelming, and energy might be at a premium. Where can I find just a few minutes in the day? And if there are a few minutes where I'm alone and I don't know, step out into the fresh air or even just pop to the loo, if I can go and stand in another room and take a moment, and instead of running through the list of things I've failed to do or how really annoying Uncle Joe was this year, just take a moment to kind of relax my shoulders, breathe out, identify some nice things that have happened and reflect on those, then I'm going to really do my well-being a lot of favours by doing that.
And they're helping children to do the same. I mean, one of the questions I often get asked is about teenagers wanting to see their friends over the Christmas period. And I had one recently, but their grandparents are coming for the day and want them to be there for the whole day because I hardly see them. And I think what I was saying back was, well, quality time is the most important thing. If you've got teenagers who are quite delighted to spend Christmas lunch with you, and knowing that in the evening they can go and see their friends, and then you can actually have your quality time with your parents, much better situation than insisting that these sulky teenagers are not allowed to go out.
Yes, absolutely, Susie. And we're just coming on to a slide called Step Families here, and I think we'll very briefly touch on this because it's not the issue for everybody, but it kind of touches on sort of blended families, separated families. There are a few points to remember, aren't there, briefly in relation to step families, Susie?
I think so. I mean, I think it's about recognizing that everybody has needs and wishes, and you have to sort of give a little bit to everybody. It's very easy when you're the parent stuck in the middle to think, I want my children to stay with me, the other person's no longer here, that's it. recognise what the children need, and they need contact with all their family. But I think to talk about it beforehand and work it out beforehand, because it may be that the children spread their time between different families over that particular break. You know, one plays on Christmas Day, one plays on Christmas Eve, one plays on Boxing Day. Or it may be that you say this year the family is with this, you know, the children are with this part of the family, next year they're with the other part of the family. Whatever works for you, but you have to plan it beforehand. I think that's the important thing.
Absolutely, and the points on the screen are points that I took from an article you'd written on step-families, and one of them, which really struck me, was see the child behind the behaviour, because in a step-family that often signifies people have come from some kind of breakup or loss, and they may be playing up, and there may be good reasons for that, and it's important to, certainly we can dislike the behaviour if they're deliberately tearing down the Christmas tree, but trying to see the kind of whole person. Yeah.
If you have a stepchild that is behaving badly, sulkily, you know, causing problems, having tantrums, what's going on is what they're probably actually saying is, my original family is no longer together and I'm really hurt about that. And yes, this is a wonderful festive time, and maybe even the new family I'm in actually is better for me, but actually I'm upset about the breakup. And I think it's understanding the grief and the loss that's underneath bad behaviour. Bad behaviour is never just about being naughty. It's about expressing an unhappiness. And sometimes if all you have to say is to say to a child, you know, you must be missing your dad or your mum, or you must be missing what it used to be like. And just saying that sometimes actually makes a tremendous difference.
Absolutely. So it's the acknowledgement and kind of diffusing the situation and suddenly enabling it to be about human emotions that we all feel, rather than you're doing this, which is really inconvenient for me.
And you're a bad child.
Yeah. Also, as we touched on earlier, you know, this is a time when we sometimes feel very acutely the loss of someone that we've loved and that we miss, whether that's because they've died or whether because relationships have changed and moved on. So I know, Amanda, I mean, you have a lot of experience of supporting bereavement and the power of acknowledging that and honouring that, haven't you?
Yes, I think there are lots of ways of doing it. I think one of the most important things is that it is acknowledged in some way, because otherwise it really is. I mean, obviously, we will hear the expression "the elephant in the room," but it really can become that. And I think that you know, it's lovely if it can be that the person that's missing can be acknowledged. I'm thinking really about somebody, a member of the family or friend who's died, and I think that sometimes I've known, some families kind of separate it slightly from the traditions of family, and maybe go and visit the grave or just have a moment to reflect on it in a slightly separate way. So a very close friend of mine, actually, her first baby died, but the whole family every single year on Christmas Eve go and visit the grave of the baby that died. And she's gone on to have more children, and they all go, and it's part of the family, and it's acknowledged, and it's become part of their family tradition. But it's, you know, it's acknowledged rather than ignored.
Absolutely, and somebody's just typed in about having perhaps treasures in a shoebox. So, you know, using that as something to remember them as a person. So you could have something that kind of focuses those memories, or indeed you could create a ritual, you know, anything as simple as going out to drop a flower into a river, or, you know, whatever it may be that would have some personal meaning, whether it's a focusing on those memories of that person or carrying out some combined ritual that could have meaning for you and others that might be part of that. So certainly, rather than pretending it's not there, I know there can be quite a lot of kind of anger and resentment if we feel other family members are moving on too swiftly. So
I think we're rather frightened of having people cry and be sad. We want it to be a happy time, and I think what we often forget is that if you try and suppress sadness, actually it's worse. It gets worse. It festers. Far better to raise the issue, maybe have a few tears, and then we can actually move on. So I think the idea of the box, the memory box, wonderful thing perhaps to bring out, you know, before Christmas lunch and do round the table. So
I was thinking of the first year after my sister-in-law died at the table when my parents-in-law were there, and we just, before we started Christmas, we all drank a toast to Jill, and that was absolutely lovely, and it was completely acknowledged, and, you know, we were all sad, and then we carried on and we were okay with the lunch, but I think it is about acknowledging it and as you say, servicing it.
Absolutely. We just had a question unrelated to this topic, but a lovely point that was just been raised. Somebody who's married into a medical family, and they have a tradition of visiting local hospitals in their family at Christmas to wish everyone a happy Christmas. So again, it's a little bit like the comment earlier of volunteering, you know, to take ourselves out of sort of frustrations or sadness that we may feel, to think of other people that might be alone, and sharing that greeting is rather wonderful. So on to the minor embarrassments, our little darlings that quite a lot of people were kind of concerned about. Are they going to let us down in front of the relatives, and so on. And I think, there's an emotional and a practical side to this. Emotionally, I remember, times of dealing way back. My sons are now 12 and 9, so it doesn't tend to happen now quite so much, but, tantrums in the supermarket. And I remember at the time, as a coach, thinking to myself, this is a growth opportunity. If I can get used to not worrying about what people think here, this is good for my maturity. And, some of it is about that, isn't it? About, letting our own mother's perfectionism be her issue rather than ours. And then there's a practical side, which perhaps we'll come on to. But certainly, Amanda, I know you're a keen advocate of not buying in too much to perfectionism, aren't you?
Yes, I was thinking about, actually my mind there was so focused on that child having a tantrum. I think I'm still thinking about that one, actually, as you speak, and thinking about what we were just saying about behaviour. Yes, children can play up, and yes, it can be very embarrassing and awkward, but I also think it's also about, saying what is and isn't acceptable, because I think we can want everything to be perfect, yes, and we can also want our children to behave in a certain way, and they don't. But I think they need boundaries. I'm thinking about small children and teenagers here.
I so agree with that. I mean, I so agree with the fact that you can draw lines in the sand and say to very small children, right way up to teenagers, this is the way we behave in this family.
Yes, and this is not okay. This is what you're doing is not okay. Yeah.
But in some ways appealing to their better nature as well, because children, they want to please.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
you reward them when they behave well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But there has to be the but, which is just asking yourself, is this about something else? And so sometimes when kids kick off, particularly if it's something like a step family around Christmas, it's actually about that grief and loss which needs to be acknowledged before you can then go on to say, but we don't behave in this way.
Yes, I think that's the bit that I think it's important to remind ourselves of. Yeah, you're absolutely right, acknowledging it, and then saying, and this isn't okay.
And then on the practical side, depending on the age of the children, I think it's important to maintain a routine. So things like bedtimes don't go by the by, and children have regular meals and not too many sugary drinks, etc., etc.
I so agree with that, and I think that sometimes we do think we're doing our children a favour by letting all the routines go out the window round about all the
children need routine.
I'm thinking about parents here as well, how much we might overdose on the sugar and the alcohol, and then we can behave badly too.
Well, you have to be a good model. That's another thing, of course, modelling. You can't expect particularly teenagers to behave well and not get drunk.
No.
If we're doing it, so it's always think about your own behaviour. But I'll tell you another thing that I feel very strongly around about Christmas. You've already raised this bit about, what do we do? How do we entertain them? And you talk here about, being bored is not a life-threatening illness. I think it's so important to not feel as parents and as adults that we're running around entertaining our children and having to think about such things for them. What about them? Yeah. What about this being their chore, throws in their laps? What would you like to do? Let's have a family time. Let's do it round the table together. But you come up with the ideas, and actually they can, they come up with wonderful ideas and feel part of it and empowered if it is given to them as a job. And I know so many kids who would love to be able to say, I want to play Monopoly or something like that. They actually don't want to go to their rooms and play on their, their machines. They actually want to be with the family doing stuff like that.
And I think at Christmas with grandparents there and an extended family, that's often a wonderful opportunity to make that happen.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And just one further point on the little darlings before we move on. A lot of people were worried about managing the over-sugared outbursts, whether ours or the children's. But, I mean, one thing that's worth saying is, it's several times worse to sort of shout at one's children in front of one's own parents. There's all sorts of stuff that we feel we're letting ourselves down on when that happens in both directions. So, if we feel that there's some disciplining or kind of negotiation that needs to take place, I mean disciplining in a sort of, talking it through firmly way, then we, one option is to take that child out into another room so that we don't have to to be watched by older relatives doing that. So, there's a kind of discretion, isn't there? If we can kind of level with the children eye to eye in a calmer atmosphere, there's more chance of resolving it well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I guess the same applies to teens, Susie, where, there's often a question of the teenagers saying, you just don't listen, and sometimes we realize perhaps we're not doing, and perhaps we're becoming our own parents in an attempt to kind of regiment them.
I can remember the day that I was actually sounding off to my lovely husband about his son, about my stepson, about something, and I suddenly heard my mother's voice and thought, oh my goodness, no, I don't want to do this, and went back to him and apologized about the particular issue. And we then started really communicating. I think this is it. You've got to listen to the way you deal with teenagers is not the same as you deal with children. With children, you are far more the person you guide and the person perhaps who has that experience. With teenagers, you have to negotiate, you have to listen. And I think particularly around this time of year, yes, you want them to be in the family, but I think you also want to give them the options to at least communicate with their friends and perhaps sometimes to step outside. And, that's about sitting around the table beforehand and saying, right, what do we want out of Christmas? What would you like to do and how would you like to come in? And you'll find if given the option, they'll probably say, oh, no, want to be with you. But they'll struggle to escape if you don't give them the option, because they've got to make their own point, and they'll stand on their own 2 feet because they're teenagers.
Yes, and I think teens sometimes almost feel a bit obliged to misbehave and not quite join in the party, but I think, having a son in his early 20s now and having gone through that, it's usually just a phase, and in fact then they come full circle and can really start enjoying Christmases once they hit early adulthood.
And I think the more you respect their wishes to be cool and not be sensitive and allow them to step out, you will find, in fact, they'll want to be, much more a part of it.
Absolutely. And, sometimes we touched on the commerciality of Christmas earlier on. Sometimes teenagers will be really aware and perhaps quite cynical about the sort of whole charade that they might perceive Christmas to be, and the attempts to get on with each other. And, they might well have a point, and they might want somewhere where they can also go off, as Susie said, and meet their own friends and have a bit of a moan about us. And, that's fair enough because they're making meaning in the world, and, they're coming up with some fair points in the process.
They often are. You need to listen to teenagers sometimes. Yeah. I mean, this is it, ask them what they want and why, and you may find, in fact, they've got a better idea. I mean, I think traditions are fabulous. I'm so in favour of them and passing them on, but you can craft them and recraft them as well. And sometimes when you have that discussion, you might come up. I mean, you just talked about, the sort of tradition you may have around somebody who's no longer at the table with you. There are all sorts of ideas that they can bring back, and particularly if you have a blended family.
I found personally with teenagers, my children got a bit older, in some ways the pressures have been released. I know we were talking earlier about, a little bit about perfectionism, and when they were little, I just remember wanting everything to be perfect and so on. And teenagers kind of aren't like that. No. And shifting my own perspective around that and just thinking, well, let's just let it be, it's actually been amazingly liberating and actually really quite relaxed. And so you kind of, for me, having teenagers around the Christmas table is I've been able to let go of it myself. That's how it's felt, and it's been lovely. It's been a real pleasure. It's a different experience, but it's lovely.
It can be fun.
There's a lot of banter.
Yeah. Absolutely. So a few more questions or comments, indeed, which are really welcome that have come in. Somebody referring back to the children and tantrums. Often it's not the children who have the tantrums, it's the older ones. For example, a mother-in-law showing off and complaining. And also somebody saying, if there are issues around a child perhaps, controlling their temper, we could forewarn grandparents. We could flag it up. It comes back to the old communication, doesn't it? We don't need to just pretend that everybody is in some fairy tale version of perfect mode, and the children will need boundaries, but they may well not learn them on Christmas Day, and, we can just get people on side with what's going on. I think it's a very good point.
It's identifying the trigger points, isn't it? It's like identifying what might happen and sidestepping them, overcoming them, tackling them, whatever is right, when you know what's going to happen.
The other question that came up earlier on, which I do want to make sure we spend a little bit of time on, is the question of Santa. So somebody specifically said, how do we address that? Do we maintain the myth, or do we reveal all? So I think among the panel we have some different opinions. I know, Susie, you're quite in favour of kind of revealing the reality, aren't you?
I don't mean saying to a 3-year-old, there is no such thing as Santa. I'm not a Scrooge and I'm not a bar humbug. But I have been actually quite pained sometimes to see, sort of 7 or 8-year-olds running around with loads and loads and loads of presents and saying this is from Santa. And there's poor old mum and dad in the corner having worked their fingers to the bone that year to afford all these things. And there's no recognition there. I mean, we were talking earlier, I said that the best gift you can give your child is the ability to manage finances. I think that sometimes we let the Santa myth go into a slightly dangerous situation, particularly, as I've also said, if you have a child who doesn't get what they want and then thinks it was because I was bad. I must have done something wrong that Santa didn't bring me what I want. So I suppose I'm saying that I think when they ask questions, the answer I have for my, was it almost a 7-year-old granddaughter who last year was getting very sceptical and asked me about Santa Claus. And I said, well, he was based on a real person who was somebody who was generous and kind and helped people. And that's what the Santa Claus idea is all about. It's about giving and sharing and loving. And isn't that a beautiful idea? And I think this year she's going to be very clear about Santa doesn't exist, does he? And I will say, well, he did. And, again, it's a wonderful idea. So, in other words, I think, be honest, because if you're not, what I think is very funny is the number of families you see where you've got cynical 10 or 12-year-olds who are keeping the secret because they don't want to hurt mum or dad. They don't want to ruin it for you.
I'd love to give another spin on that. I don't know if we've got time.
Well, if it's quick, Amanda, because there's some lovely comments coming. Actually, first of all, I want to say a great big oops, because somebody has rather wonderfully typed in, what do you mean there's no such thing as Santa? So huge apologies. And that's a man. That's one of our male participants. What a lovely comment. Somebody else saying that they told their child that Santa lived in Turkey and helped children, and now he's in heaven, and he can only afford to, or he can only give them one present because he's lots of children to cater for, which is great. Somebody saying they still struggle with the kind of northern reindeer situation. And then, somebody else saying that they remove the labels from presents that come in from everybody, so they're all from Santa, which is rather nice. So that's a different option on that.
But then you're not learning about friends and generosity and love, are you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Amanda, what was your other point?
Well, our tradition, and again, it's a culture and a tradition, is that if anyone who believes in Santa in my house gets a stocking. So the 20-year-old and the 18-year-old, they all say, do you believe in Santa? Absolutely, Mum. And so they get a stocking. And that's because it's never acknowledged that Santa doesn't exist. And the fact that Santa had too much Christmas Eve last year and had to be kicked awake to fill the stockings was something that went a bit wrong. But actually, on the point of money, I guess the tradition has been that they're always very, very small presents, and that the big presents do come from us as parents. So I think that's an interesting angle too.
Thanks, Amanda. And moving on, beginning to wrap up now with what you'll take forward. And somebody's just emailed to say what a great idea about forewarning relatives about tantrums. I'm off to email presently, so that's already an action point, which is great. Thank you for that. So one of the things we just wanted to touch on as we begin to wrap up is, some of what we're looking at here is about our vision and values for ourselves as an individual, for ourselves in relation to family. And some of this carries over into the new year. If I can think about who I'm being in front of my family, who I'm trying to be, and what the day-to-day reality is, and if I can possibly turn a little bit of that towards, the kind of assertiveness and communication and respect that we've been talking about, then, that can put us in a good position for going forward into the new year. So maybe it's about identifying, a couple of things for ourselves that really capture how we want to be. And I'm reminded here of, Gandhi's message about be the change you want to be in the world, and the way that he said his life was his message. Sometimes, the way that we talk about in-laws and their perfectionism, and often they're blatantly not living it out. So, one of the things we could perhaps take forward is can I live, as people were very generously posting, the ideas of the kind of volunteering and giving, can I live in relation to my family the way that I want to capture the Christmas spirit? So that's one thought to take forward. Some further tips and hints, many of which we've kind of captured already as we've gone along. So just a few captured there for you to take forward. A Secret Santa approach can make presents easier, so there's an option on that. But taking it forward, what will you actually plan to do? You know, are there one or two practical things from here, or is it more of a kind of emotional shift? I wonder what you think you might take forward. You know, how do you think you'll approach Christmas from here? So we'd like to run our final poll here, just wrapping up. What do you think you'll actually do going forward? And somebody's asking for a soft copy of the PowerPoint, which we can make available, but there will be the recording on your Work and Family space, so we definitely urge you to go into the coaching section of the Work and Family space, and you'll find the webinar archive there where you can see again which with the slides and the audio. So somebody's wishing us a lovely Christmas and joy and peace and so on. So many thanks, John, and we wish the very same to you as well. So we've got a fair few people just voting on that poll. I don't know, Susie, whether, you know, as poll results come in, whether you have any kind of closing tips on how to have Christmas be good rather than stressful.
I think the idea is to be good enough. Lovely phrase that Bruno Bettelheim invented. Not the perfect parent, not the perfect Christmas, but something that's good enough. And the way to get good enough is to plan a bit in advance, lower the bar a bit, be kind to yourself as well as everybody else, relax and enjoy it. And I think it is about, as you've just said, the stress comes from setting your expectations incredibly high and thinking you've got to do it all. Spread it all around a bit, communicate a lot more, relax, chillax, as kids would now say.
How infuriating is that?
Stress with that.
So a lot of people have voted here to say, you know, perhaps what I can try and do is accept myself and my relatives, have a bit of a wry smile about how we are, and, you know, what a joy that would be if we could maybe stand back. There's a lot of talk these days about mindfulness, isn't there, about, you know, having a little bit of a distance between us and the thoughts we get caught up in, and just observing the situation a little bit. And if we can manage that, we might just see a kind of glimmer of humour in it. But many people now typing in to say they've really enjoyed the webinar and Merry Christmas and so on. So much appreciation for that. Many thanks. Just a reminder of the Work and Family space, which I did touch on, but as well as the archive of webinars, there's a help centre there. Speak to an expert if there are certain points that you want to pick up, insider guides and so on the help centre. And as we promised, further reading and resources, including various very relevant books by Susie. And don't forget Woman magazine, where Susie's Agni Aunt column takes place. So many thanks indeed. We'll also appreciate your feedback, which will go out to you, a survey, very small survey, following this immediately. And we'd really love to hear your comments. But once again, many thanks indeed for taking part today. It's been wonderful the way that you've engaged, not only taking part in the polls, but all of the questions and comments you've shared. So thanks indeed, and I wish you all happiness in the weeks ahead, however you plan to spend that. Goodbye.